Yahya Burt, and I work as a research director for the newly established Ayan Institute in London, which is dedicated to seeing a Muslim world that is united, independent, strong, prosperous, free of war and conflict, and capable of resolving its own issues. Professor Ihsanoglu, our distinguished guest today, has had a distinguished career as an historian of science and education, particularly in the Ottoman domains. And he has 2 new books out, which we shall discuss in the second half of this interview. But first we turn to consider the present and future challenges and prospects for intra-Muslim cooperation and solidarity in our troubled present, and looking into the future. Looking to draw upon Professor Ihsanoglu's extensive experience and insight into these matters, having been involved with the OIC since 1980 and acting as its 9th president and the first democratically elected president between 2004 and 2014. In that year, 2014, the professor ran for the presidency of the Turkish Republic. Welcome, Professor, and thank you for honoring us with your presence. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I hope you are all well in these difficult times of COVID-19. And it is a big challenge that created this Zoom technology that you sit in your pajamas and you can talk to the whole world. I'm not having pajamas. I try to be to behave myself.
Thank you, Professor. Well, all we can see is the top half of everybody. Who knows what's going on out off camera? So to kick off, can you tell us something about what inspired you personally to dedicate your life as an academic and a statesman to work towards promoting Muslim cooperation and conciliation? What resources did you draw upon in this work to give you yourself guidance and direction?
Well, I think I have been influenced by a generation of my father, and at the same time by the development of the world affairs as a grew young man in the student in university, even before that, watching the world, how it shapes. The first aspect that my father and his generation were born at the turn of the 20th century. And when they were about 20 years old or 30 years old, the symbolic bond or bringing all Muslims went off. So they lamented this disappearance of us, let's say, the traditional institutions or symbolic institutions bringing together Muslims. But for me as a young man, the development of the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, many other regional organizations to bring together member countries who share certain interests was a motivation to think of how to serve the Muslim world better. And I think the formula of OIC created 50 years back was the only possible formula on those days and still today to get together these states who have majority of Muslim population, who have shared history, shared geography, and they should have shared future as well. But the target is not, as it is said here, unification, because unification is not the word that will describe the best modus operandi among Muslim countries. The best way is more cooperation and more solidarity in all domains. And that will help these societies to develop, to be modernized, and to be prosperous, and to solve their problems through moderation and modernization, as I always used to express my main ideas.
And thank you for that, Professor. I mean, and you mentioned your father as an influence upon you, but Were there other intellectual influences upon you as a young man that drew you towards this work?
Well, of course, you know, as a young man, you read all different things, but I was not influenced particularly by certain school of thought. I read all over through, and I was not influenced by certain schools of thought. So though I knew them, I read the literature, etc. But I prefer to be an independent mind.
Hmm. And so with this kind of independence of mind, what does the Ummah mean to you as a critical, practical concept in an age of nation states, but also where we have this sort of post-West shift to a multipolar world, in a world of diasporas connected in real time through the internet? So today, what can the Ummah mean to us practically, politically, if we want to have solidarity and cooperation?
Well, the concept of Ummah is there in the Holy Quran and in the traditions of the Prophet. And in reality, there's also a sociological aspect to it. It is there. You can feel it wherever you go, wherever Muslims are. And it's sociological, and it gives, or it creates a sense of solidarity among Muslims. So how the key question here is how you transform these notions to workable formulas in the 20th century or the 21st century or in the next century. We cannot stick to the old patterns, though there would have been better to keep some institutions, as it is the case in the West, in other countries, but we tend to have everything modernized in our part of the world, and we fail in building modern institutions sometimes, and then we look around, we don't find the old ones. So I think this is what I understand from, and we have to develop this concept in more modern way of thinking and modern way of cooperating among ourselves.
Okay, so would you mind sort of elucidating your thought and experience about what constitute good practice of Muslim cooperation, solidarity, both individually but also collectively? And I'm asking you purposefully to think also on an individual level, because I want to draw out your thinking about how we can have these skills of, surely it's a skillful practice. You know, somebody must be skilled at conciliation and skilled at bringing people together, not only just working collectively, institutionally.
Of course, there should be mechanisms and instruments to do that. And I think in 10 years or 9 years where I was Secretary General of OIC, we have reorganized and revitalized, re-energized the already created instruments and created new ones to work in fields of economic cooperation, trade, exchange of trade, in humanitarian aid, in culture, in education, in science and technology, etc. And through these channels, you could develop your thought, you develop your career, and you can get more young people and talented young people to be trained, etc., to create mechanisms and to work them properly. I think we had succeeded to some extent. I don't know if this has been already the case now or not. Exactly what is happening, except from the public mirror that reflects some sort of activities. But there are channels, there are ways, there are instruments, and I found that find cooperation from different international organizations. For instance, when we wanted to draw a map of the scientific activities in the Muslim world, we found the Royal Society in this country, in your country, very helpful and cooperative to us. We worked on for a few years together to do this, and we succeeded to some good extent.
Thank you for that. As you mentioned in the book that you brought out a decade ago, in the middle of your term as I see, the Islamic world in the new century, you comment near the beginning of the book that in the late 1960s, the political unity of Muslim nations on Al-Quds, Palestine, and the Arab-Israel conflict laid the groundwork for the formation times now. How can intra-Muslim cooperation and development be re-energized now, today?
Well, this is true, but this is not only true for OIC. It's true for all international organizations, because the Palestinian issue is not only Islamic problem or crisis, it's worldwide. And, but of course, OIC managed in the 50 years, particularly the last 10 years, to build up multifarious institutions, activities. I will explain some of them later in answer to your questions. And this should work on, should carry on, and should be developed more and more. For instance, among the 10-year program of action, which was adopted in 2005, and that created a paradigm shift in OIC, where the main documents, which is 10-year plan of action, the new charter, which was approved in 2008, spoke about good governance, about democracy, about empowerment of women, about human rights, creating a permanent institution for human rights in OIC, accountability, credibility, all these things. This started in those 9 years or 10 years, and they should be on and on to improve our societies, to modernize them. And without doing this, we will always suffer marginal groups dictating on the big masses with radicals on different parts of society. So it's an ongoing process. It's pity what is going on related to the Palestinian issue, which is the core issue, which was the reason of the spark of the creation of the OIC. It's pity that what happened now and the indifference on the side of some countries, member countries, I'm sure this will not go too long. Now we see in President Biden's administration a shift towards the interest of the legal rights of the Palestinian people, legal and historical rights of the Palestinian people, and the solution of two-state solution. So I think this is, for some time it will be like this, but we have to also see that there are many projects to help the Palestinian people. They should be implemented. And the blueprints are there, the decisions are there, but they need implementation.
Thank you, Professor. Perhaps one of the greatest tests in our times is the challenge of China, which has greatly increased its economic and political influence with OIC countries. Nowhere is this more apparent with the relative weakness, silence, and in some cases tepid support for China's mass internment of over 1 million Uyghur Muslims, with harrowing evidence of emerging of rape, torture, mass sterilization, and suppression of the religion and the culture of this people. While at the same time, China's Belt and Road Initiative, among others, is buying compliance in the Muslim world. Similarly, India has been able to put Kashmir into the world's largest military lockdown, and has unilaterally rescinded its right to self-determination. Yet it seems very low down on the agenda of the world's leading Muslim nations. This speaks to the new challenges of a multipolar world in which Muslim minorities may fare worse because no one can influence the behavior of competing hegemons in their own backyards. What is your comment on this issue?
I'm afraid you are almost right. I'm afraid you are almost right. But let me explain to you the difference when you take action and be responsible or you don't take action. In 2009, in the Uyghur Autonomous Region, some troubles happened, some aggressions against violation of human rights happened, and this stirred in reaction in the Muslim world. And we start to take certain actions, invite member countries of OIC to convene, discuss, and determine certain policies vis-a-vis the violation of human rights, religious rights of the Uyghur Muslims. This was not well received by the Chinese government because it is the first time in almost 45 years since the creation of OIC that OIC took such an initiative. Later on, diplomatic contacts with OIC and China took place, and they agreed to that we send what has been called fact-finding mission, or we found nicer diplomatic term, and then they extended an invitation to the Secretary General of OIC to visit China, and particularly Uyghur Autonomous Region, Xinjiang. And that happened in June 2010. The fact that China opened its door to a foreign organization and agreed to discuss with it what always considered as its own internal affairs was itself a recognition of the credibility of the new OIC and its importance on the international arena. The success of this visit, which I can speak for a long time, was marked by a joint statement between OIC and China. This is a first. Then we agreed on certain issues with the government of China, and we opened a new channel of understanding. Of course, for minorities outside member countries, the OIC is under the mandate of Charter to assist Muslim minorities and communities outside the member states to preserve their dignity, cultural and religious identity. This is a mandate of the Charter, the new Charter, which I proposed to the heads of states, and it was agreed on 2008. So we, or OIC, is under the mandate to assist Muslim minorities and communities. Now, I don't know what is going on, but this is where you can succeed. On the same point related to your question, Kashmir, you said Kashmir. For Kashmir, for instance, OIC, in my time, OIC and through its contact group on Jammu and Kashmir continue to extend its full support to the people of Kashmir and their legitimate right of self-determination through peaceful means in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions, and etc., etc. But of course, when you ask me, what is the outcome of your actions? which is very detailed, would it change the reality on the stage? My answer is simply no. Then you have to ask me why no. I will tell you, this is the crux of the whole issue. Member countries come to OIC with their own problems. Some of these problems are so critical that the other member countries would not support your point because they have conflict of interest with the second party or the third party. So they will either abstain or just give lip service and take resolution, which is 4 or 5 pages, resolves to do this, recommends this, urges to do, interrupts secretary to do so and so, and then nothing happens. This is the case for your problem and my problem. So you cannot move to help me more than you can, and you stop at a certain point, and the same for me. This is why I try to get out of this vicious circle, and I advise member countries, instead of having few pages, paragraphs of doing nothing except wasting paper and ink, I told them, let's agree on certain steps, practical steps, which we can do. Well, my advice worked in some cases, I did not work in other cases, but at least I opened a venue for better cooperation.
Thank you for that very frank answer, Professor. What prospects do you see in healing major rifts in the central Muslim lands between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or the intra-Sunni Cold War that has emerged after the Arab Spring, or in the unresolved trauma of the Palestinian people? Are there resources in the region to tackle these things? Can the OIC play a constructive role here? Or will we be forced to rely on external powers like America, Russia, or China to force their competing agendas on the region?
Well, I don't know if you remember in 2006, the Mecca summit between Sunnis and Shias, Sunni leaders and Shia leaders, when the sectarian fight in Baghdad was taking hundreds of tours every day, blowing up shrines, mosques, etc. OIC took an initiative to bring together the leaders of Sunnis and Shia. And despite the initiatives taken by other intergovernmental international organizations where Iraq, Iran, and other countries were members failed, OIC succeeded. And the reason for success of OIC was it hit the core of the conflict. The core of conflict was the affiliation or identity of being Sunni or being Shia, and that these two identities are hostile to each other. So what we did, I made the invitation in the name of the Academy of Jurisprudence of Fiqh Academy, International Fiqh Academy, which is one of the organs of OIC. And I worked with the leading scholars, religious scholars of both sides to bring a text of reconciliation between the leaders of two parties. And I got the agreement of the two parties. And I invited them to come to Jeddah and then to go to Mecca al-Mukarramah in the presence of Haram Sharif to sign the agreement. And they did. And this was in Laylatul Qadr. And it has great impact. And this is where the fight stopped, and I will give you a nice story that when we brought the leaders from Amman, because there was no communication to Baghdad, they had to come by car to Amman, and we sent them a special flight to bring them to Jeddah. They refused to sit to each other in the car, in the bus, in the airplane. After we signed the accord, they were together, sitting and enjoying themselves. And after a few weeks, they invited me to Baghdad. I went there. The heads of the two sects, hand in hand, were at the airport receiving me. And that was a great success in 2006. This should have been carried on a bigger level, a wider level. And that shows you that if you solve your problems in your house, neighbors will not interfere.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor, for that. Can I just say somebody's got their microphone switched on and we can hear some lovely children playing around in the background, but I think it's not right for that to be competing with the professor's interview. So can whoever has their mic switched on, can they switch it off, please? Thank you. Okay, so Professor, during your tenure, a target of 20% for intra-OIC trade was set, and from the figures I saw from the official OIC sources, that was nearly achieved in 2017 for mercantile trade. So you achieved 19% was achieved in 2017. So this is a great success story. But I was wondering, what challenges and opportunities are there in the next 10 years to exceed that target? And what are the key issues preventing economic development in the Muslim world? And how can it get out of debt and dollar dependency? If you have a chance, please offer some examples.
Well, thank you. This is a very important question. And this is very important, successful example of how OIC cooperation can be successful. This program has been proposed in the 10-year program of action in December 2005 summit in Mecca. And we set a target. In 2005, intra-trade was 15%. And we, after a thorough study by economists, approved or proposed that we increase the trade from 15% to 20%. The target was to foster development of small and medium-sized enterprises and private sector in OIC countries by improving their competitiveness. And this is what happened, and create jobs. Now, in 2005, as I said, it was around 15%. In 2015, it reached 20%. I show here this graphic, if you like.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Now, when you look to some accomplishment of this, you find on the individual certain countries level, Djibouti, for instance, it's 97% of its export and most of its import products are with other OIC countries. Somali, 90%. Sudan, 84%. And the same happened in Sudan, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and many others. Overall, 42 countries out of 57 OIC countries experience an increase in their share of exports in the OIC region. Of course, to create these trade facilities, you have to make 3 agreements. Framework agreement of the preferential trade system. Second, protocol on preferential tariff scheme, PRETAS. Third, the rules of origin. When I left office, these agreements were about to be finalized because it needed certain number of quorum of member countries to ratify the instruments. I hope it is working, and we built in this system financing facilities through IDB, Islamic Development Bank, which is one of specialized institutions of the OIC.
Thank you very much, Professor. Outside of, we've been used to thinking about increased Muslim cooperation as intergovernmental. And the OIC has been, as you've been explaining during the interview, sort of the main example of this in our age. But in our complex globalized world, we do need to think about how to foster Muslim cooperation outside of the state. Or at the very least, how might states facilitate non-state, civil society, Muslim cooperation? For example, diasporas, transnational movements, cultural exchange, business opportunities, and so on. Can you say something about this?
Well, I have to say that when I start my job as ninth Secretary of OIC, I had to face the tsunami tragedy in Indonesia, and the urgent need to have humanitarian aid facilities at OIC. Then after tsunami in Indonesia, earthquake in Pakistan, floods and earthquake in Iran, etc., etc. So we started to think of creating a humanitarian organization or affiliate institution. We started good work, but when we came to and we cooperated with many of Muslim aid institutions in the United Kingdom, very successfully. And because we gave them a reach which they could not realize under the British flag. So it was under OIC flag that they could reach more people, needy people. Anyhow, I'm afraid that the human department which I created did not carry on, unfortunately. I can't explain the reasons, but during my tenure, there were very good examples with the diaspora, with the communities in this country, in many European countries, in the United States, in Australia, etc. So we consider these communities not as underdeveloped or under-treated minorities. We consider them as members of very advanced countries where the rule of law is observed, human rights are observed. So we don't have problems with this. On the contrary, we had very good cooperation with them. And I have to also to mention that during my time, we created a new position, a new status for OIC countries. When the Russian Federation was accepted as an observer, Americans, the United Kingdom and Germany and others, they wanted to have the same status. So our answer was that the Russians, the Russian president, President Putin, said openly, we have 10% of our population Muslims. So do you have the same percentage? They said, we cannot give this answer to you. So we created what we called permanent representatives of this country. So the United Kingdom has a permanent representative, the United States as well. The United States created the position of permanent representative to the OIC, and it was a Pakistani American citizen, was a close friend of President Bush.
Okay. Thank you very much for answering these questions, Professor. We're going to move on to look at your long and distinguished career as an historian of science and education in the Ottoman world. And you've returned again to publishing and have 2 new books out this year. One of them collects your essays on science and education in the Ottoman world from Routledge. It's called,
this is the one.
Studies on Ottoman Science and Culture. And the second is from the Oxford University Press. It's a new piece of research. The House of Science is the first modern university in the Muslim world, which considers the rise of the Dar al-Funun in the 19th century within the Ottoman domains. Do you want to talk a little bit to us about your recent read about these books before we sort of go to Q&A?
With pleasure.
Yeah.
The book on the House of Sciences, which is translation of the word Dar al-Funun. Dar means house, Funun means sciences, the House of Science. The first modern university in the Muslim world. Actually, I would like here to bring to the attention of our followers that not necessarily institutions you have in your history, in your culture, should be equal to the other institutions in a different culture and different civilization. Education as human activity, inculcating information, bringing young people, has been there since man was created. Father has to teach his son or his daughter, master has to teach his apprentice, etc. Institutions of learning are there in the old Egyptians, Sumerians, Chinese, Indians, and in Muslim world and in Europe. But to equate one institutions here with the other there is not correct, because they are different. Take madrasas in the Islamic history. Madrasas was perhaps more advanced in its structure than other institutions of learning, East or West, because it has an endowment and it has a subsidy where students can come and the teacher is paid by the endowment, and the students have these stipends where they can freely learn and be licensed by their masters. In the West, you have the universitas, where universitas was a cooperation between students and teachers. And it has to be financed by the students themselves. They had to pay their masters or teachers. And the legal aspect of the foundation of madrasa and universitas is quite different. In the madrasa, it is the Waqf institution, the Waqf endowment, that you endow certain money and you put your conditions saying that in the madrasa I built and I endow this money or this property should teach the Hanafi mazhab or Maliki mazhab, or should not teach these sciences. And this is my condition. And in Islamic law, the Shartul Waqif Kanas Shari, the condition made by the endower, is like the dogma made by the law maker. You cannot change. In the European case, Universitas was a corporation, and it is not endowment. And in corporation, you can change. You have certain quorum, you can change the teaching programs, etc. In the Islamic part of it, you cannot change.
Mm.
Of course, there is a relation between this and that. I tried to show in this book that, and before me, Professor George Makdisi from the States showed that there were certain academic traditions created by Muslim scholars through their long career of scholarship that were transferred to European institutions, like term or license, which is translation of ijazat, where like licentia docenti means license for teaching, Latin for this ijazat at-tadris. So the certain traditions of scholarship from this world were transferred with many other books of philosophy, of medicine, of physics, of chemistry, of mathematics, astronomy, were educated, were used in the European institutions. But when we speak about the university of today, which you are a student, and I was a student, your father, my father, my grandfather were students of, this university is different than the medieval European universities and totally different from Islamic madrasas. The university, as we experience students and teachers, is the product of two big European developments. The Industrial Revolution, which started in England and then spread to certain parts of Europe and then to the whole world, Industrial Revolution, and what the French will call enseignement public, public education. This came after the French Revolution, that education should be free, run by the state, and everybody should be eligible to learn and to be have schooling. These two major factors were not there in the Ottoman Empire or in the other parts of the Muslim world. Madrasas were going on their traditional way. In a way, they were stagnant. I don't agree with the word decline. In the question here, the madrasa system was in decline. It was not in decline. It was going on according to certain standard, and this is stagnation. Now, in 19th century reformers of the Ottoman Empire, what we call the Tanzimat reformers, they thought of establishing a university like that one in Europe, not like the ones we have here, the madrasas. They should be different. Madrasas is teaching ulum, religious sciences mainly, and other. It also teaches philosophy, it teaches mathematics, geometry, astronomy, medicine. They are teaching these sciences, but with old texts, traditional classic texts. Now, what is needed in the 19th century to modernize the Ottoman state is to have a new institution like the one in Europe, the university in Europe. And we have to make our own university. And this coined the word Dar al-Funun, Dar for house and Funun for sciences, which means natural sciences, mathematical sciences, applied sciences. So the university as such, at the University of Europe, of England in the 19th century, is something new to the Muslim world, and it is not the development of old institutions.
Mm. And I mean, do you feel that do you feel that in your recent book you felt the need to discuss the question of the birth of printing? Do you agree with the idea?
Let me please, before we leave the House of Sciences, when you see how universities started in different parts of Europe, in England, France, Germany, then the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, etc. You find that effect of enseignement public education policy, and the effect of the Industrial Revolution on creating scholars and engineers who can help the Industrial Revolution to get its fruits, to work for the society, to work for the richness of the country, etc. You need engineers, you need technicians, you need chemists, you need physicists, you need biologists. Where you get them? You cannot get them in the old style universities, European universities, and you cannot get them in Ottoman or Islamic madrasas. So under these two factors, you observe that the stage where a society in Europe or outside Europe come to maturity or to development, where it can open and establish a modern university, has to secure three processes. First, secularization, that you allow secular institutions to be built, because the new universities did not belong to churches in Europe. They were secular. So you have to have parallel to this. Secondly, bureaucratization. Bureaucratization means the state to be run by bureaucrats who are graduates of these modern universities. Third aspect, specialization, that you have to have specialization in this new university that produce certain technocrats, bureaucrats, physicists, chemists, etc., etc. So these processes, before you complete them, and this is what happened in Istanbul, because they started in 1840, 1850, but they only managed to do the proper establishment of the House of Sciences in 1900, after 50 years, during which all these processes happened.
I think we've got time for one more question before we go to Q&A from our audience. So to ask you a general question from your work on science, you attempt to make a distinction between European science and Ottoman science. Do you believe that there can be an Ottoman science that's devoid of European science?
Well, the answer is no. Okay. But the question is not right.
Okay.
By Ottoman science, I mean, this is a definition which I made 40 years back, all scientific activities taking place within the framework, time framework and geography framework of the Ottoman Empire. So any scientific activities, including activities made by Muslims, non-Muslims, because this is another question you asked. And of course, here in the scientific activities, we have to distinguish two phases. The first phase, the Ottomans at the beginning of their empire, they were building their institutions, state institutions, social institutions, education institutions on pre-Ottoman Seljukids, Ilhanids, Abbasids, Mamluks, etc., etc. So they are not too different from them. And they were the inheritance of the Samarkand, the inheritance of Damascus, Cairo traditions, and they combined them. These classical Islamic scientific activities went on developing, enlarging, and it went up to the 16th century to bring the Islamic tradition of science to its apogee. Then the Ottomans started to make benefit of European scientific advancements. They drew maps, compasses, and then they start to make use of their time, of their astronomical tables, medical books, etc. So they started to approach Europe to translate, to adopt, appropriate scientific text knowledge. When I see Ottomans and European science, I don't mean that the European science is different. Science is the same. But here you have a new trends, discoveries, information, and you have another side who wants to learn this and acquire them. So it is not that distinction between the nature and qualification of science, apart from it's where it was belonging to.
Okay. I know that, Professor, we had a couple of more questions about your books, but I think in the interest of fairness to our listeners, I think we ought to give them the remaining 15 minutes. We should give them to give to their questions and answers that they might have for us.
We've got some questions come through the chat.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so
I've got a question from Hassan. He's going. Let me just bring Hassan in.
Okay.
Just
who's asking the question?
Hassan Abedin. I think you know him.
Okay, Dr. Abedin, how are you?
I'm very good, Excellency. Nice to see you.
It's my pleasure.
So good to have you on this conversation, mashallah.
I'm glad you are with them. And you settled now about your kids?
Yes, alhamdulillah, all is well. Family is doing great, alhamdulillah.
I'm happy to know this. The book is coming soon, I hope.
Yes, inshallah. We look forward to that. Adding to your repertoire and to your collection.
Thank you.
Very soon.
Thank you.
Excellency, it's been so good to hear you recount your experiences in the OIC, which goes back so many decades to 1980, even before your tenureship as Secretary General. And you have already mentioned some key points and achievements in your time regarding China, but also in terms of economic development. But recently there has been another community in the headlines. In the last few days, we have watched, the world has watched this coup in Myanmar, and the situation of the Rohingya Muslim minority has now become even more desperate as we all wonder and are concerned about their plight. And you also, under your tenure, had taken a pioneering role in defending the rights of the Rohingya, which many people perhaps are not aware of in the call today. And perhaps you might be able to shed some light about what we did in the OIC to defend the Rohingya rights, particularly in 2012 when the first incidents of violence took place by Buddhist mobs against the Muslim minority there, and your role in bringing it to the international community's attention. And one of the things, as you recall, that resulted in your action was the historic first ever OIC Secretary General being invited to the White House in Washington. And that was a direct result of your work. But perhaps you might say something about your work for the Rohingya.
Well, I think you are the best person who can elucidate this detail, because you have been instrumental in drawing and implementing the policies of OIC on minority. And it's pity that you left OIC. And when I'm asked why it is not going on the same way, I say, how can you go if you don't have the power, the human power to do? It's pity. I'm very sad for that. Well, as you already has explained, Dr. Abedin, OIC was proactive. OIC became a global actor. And this is how people in the White House, people in the Kremlin and elsewhere, they started to think of OIC as a global actor. And I have to say that in Rohingya, for instance, issue, there was a limitation of us that we thought of member countries, ASEAN, who are member countries of OIC, would be of help to us, which did not happen. They preferred the regional interest to the global interest. So I give you another hint to the limitation of solidarity. But this does not mean that we should shy from solidarity or should we be negative about it. I think the good examples we had, if they are emulated, we can go further.
Thank you very much. Ms.
We've
Ann, do you
got
have
another question. Got another question from Rashid Dar.
Oh, hi, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How are you doing? I had a quick question for you. I work in a large philanthropy, and I often give money to Muslim academics as well as Muslims in traditional institutions like madrasas, etc. So I'm dealing with people who call themselves sheikh, people who call themselves doctor, and then people who are kind of trying to play the middle. And so I've recently been trying to think about the notion of the Islamic university that you see in various locales around the Muslim world. And, you know, in the past 100 years is kind of, or so, I mean, I guess we can talk about the dates. We've seen the rise of this institution, this kind of hybrid institution. And so given your reflection on this issue, can we say anything about the success or failures of the Islamic university? Is it time for a rethink? You know, in my humble opinion, as far as I can see, hybrid Islamic universities have largely been a flop, but I'm happy to be corrected. This is just my impression, but that's all.
Well, I must admit that I did not study scholarly study these universities from your point of view, though I have I feel proud of having honorary PhDs from the two Islamic universities, one in Pakistan and one in Malaysia. But in reality, I can't say that I have studied them, because you have to study teaching programs, how the graduates are doing, how the scholarship associated, what they brought to the Islamic thinking or Islamic culture of any new developments or new ideas. I'm sorry, I am afraid I can't answer you properly.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got another person, Siraj Wahab.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor Ekmeleddin Ihsanoglu. This is Siraj Wahab from Arab News, Jeddah.
Oh,
And
yes, Siraj, brother, how are you?
it's such a pleasure listening to you and seeing you.
You have all the news now in Jeddah.
We miss you, Your Excellency, and I want to congratulate the organizers for making this possible, of listening to you and getting your perspective on what's happening. I don't have a question, but I want to, for the benefit of the people here who are in this program, I want to tell them that Professor Ekmeleddin Ihsanoglu really energized the OIC like nobody else. It was a dormant institution. It was an institution without any teeth. And as he very rightly mentioned, there were some historic events that took place during his tenure. He mentioned about the Makkah summit, the 10-year plan of action, the role of minorities or the plight of minorities in non-Muslim countries. He did excellent, but the thing that bothers me, Professor, is that after you left, that there was nothing institutional that could be that could stay the way you energized them. Your followers, your successors could not maintain the momentum. Then I, as a journalist, what I see, the main reason behind was that you had an advantage of understanding both the Arabic and the non-Arabic world. So in the absence of a non-Arab Secretary General, it becomes more like an Arab League. An Arab League is as dysfunctional as any other organization. So you had a key advantage of knowing the best of both worlds, and you really amalgamated the two major parts of the Muslim world. So do you think that we need, especially in OIC, that there has to be somebody in that key position who understands the entire Ummah in its entirety rather than just a particular region, which then
it was the Arab part, the Asian, and don't forget African, because in my time, I visited all African countries, all African countries. I was the only secretary who visited all African countries, and we had very good cooperation with them. And they did a very great work for the advancement of OIC new programs, particularly President Wade of Senegal was very helpful. He was a broad-minded gentleman. So we hope for good, Saraj Saab.
Yeah, do you want to take some of the questions from the chat I sent to you?
Certainly. I don't know what you will think of this question, Professor, but it's an interesting one. This is coming from somebody, I guess, who's Muslims living in the West. They're asking, how can we get involved with the OIC? You know, and likewise, how can the OIC adapt to the growth of large expatriate Muslim populations in the West? So, I mean, you gave the example of the humanitarian aid organizations that you worked with, but are there any other examples that you could maybe share from your experience?
We had very good cooperation with Sir Sakrani, for instance, when he was the head of the
MCB.
Yes, and many others. My advice, my dear friend, is to knock the door. You need to knock the door. Study what happened in the old days, bring some ideas, and knock the door. And before you knock the door, I'm ready to consult with you, advise you, and formulate some of your ideas. This is, take the first step.
Okay.
We got a question from Ismail Nakhuda. Ismail.
Ismail.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It actually feels, as a former journalist at the Arab News and also somebody who worked at the OIC after yourself, Your Excellency, it feels like a bit of a get-together. Bit of a, I have a class get-together many years after, so it does feel a bit like that, meeting Siraj and seeing Dr. Hassan. In terms of, I think one of the things, I mean, I spent a year at the OIC just a few years ago after Dr. Ihsanoglu had left, and I saw with my own eyes some of the work that had gone into specifically around Muslim minorities and some of the work Dr. Abedin had done in terms of Myanmar and also in southern Thailand and other areas. And I thought to myself, when I left after 1 year, I thought to myself, wow, this was a fantastic opportunity. And I think going back to the question before about what Muslim minorities in the West could possibly do for the OIC, I think there's quite a lot. And I think the OIC is quite open to people linking in. And I just feel that, if people had a slightly more open mind when interacting with the OIC, there's a lot more that people could contribute. And I think the other thing I really wanted to mention was that I also saw at hand what our IRCICA was and the contributions they had made in its particular sphere. I was hoping to hear a little bit more about that journey from Dr. Ihsanoglu. But the question I really want to ask is, what 3 things could he summarize his contributions to IRCICA to be, and how did he reach, how did he allow the organization to get to that level of contributing so well to Islamic history and culture? Jazakallah.
Thank you for opening a small window on IRCICA. IRCICA reality is a great institution. And this is appreciated by so many people in the East and in the West. My motivation was to create our own standards, high standards of scholarship that tells the world the real story of Islamic civilization and Muslim people. And I made certain safeguards, putting, for instance, a time limit on historical studies not to go beyond the First World War. Because when you go beyond First World War, you come to nation states, etc., and border conflicts and nationalism, patriotism, etc. The Muslim war before the First World War was more a homogeneous one, less conflicts. So I said we should not sacrifice 14th century for half a century. This was one guideline. The second guideline, that I started focusing on peripheral areas. All Islamic studies, European, American, Russian, Orientalistic studies, were focusing on the core of Islam, the core land, Arab land, Iran, and Turks, Ottomans for some, not always, but Arabs, Persians, and some extent Turks. India was not existing. Southeast Asia was not existing. Africa was not existing. Central Asia was not too much existing. Oral Altai, Volga area Muslims were not existing. So I started from there. I started particularly from Southeast Asia. And our first project was on the Malay world, Islamic civilization in the Malay world. And I got scholars from Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, who wrote certain chapters. We designed the volume, and they wrote the chapters, giving their own vision of the history of Islamic civilization in the Malay world. And this book was published in different languages, Malay, English, etc. Then second focus was South Asia, East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, Central Asia, the Balkans. And we started convening scholarly meetings, inviting scholars. If we are doing East Africa, scholars from East African institutions, and scholars from all over the world, from Muslim world, from non-Muslim world, who specialized on Islam. And then we created a forum, a networking of scholars. So all the prejudices of the previous time has been washed up, and Orientalistic studies started to be more understanding. And we can say that for the last few decades, Orientalistic studies are more fair than anything else, with the exception of Islamophobic public publication. This is another score. This is another category. There are many other aspects. It needs a long time, and you have to invite me for biryani, pilau, and then I will come.
Inshallah. We've got a question from Jahangir Mohammed, who is the director of the Ayan Institute. Jahangir, I'm just going to unmute you.
Please go ahead.
Alaikum salam. Professor, that was thank you for your wonderful contribution and insights. My question is that there seems to be a perception these days that the OIC is failing, or in some quarters that it has now failed, and even among some of the other states there are some moves to create a new bloc, as it were. I think we had in 2019 the Malaysia conference around Muslim unity, with the new countries like Malaysia, Pakistan, Turkey trying to come together to raise new issues. And of course, the first conference, Pakistan didn't attend because of Saudi pressure, it's claimed. But that movement seems to be, that trend or movement seems to be going. What are your feelings on that? Is that something that is needed? Is the OIC now old hat? Do we need a new structure for a new world?
Well, I think my dear friend Siraj would be the best candidate to answer such a question based in Jeddah, because I'm not following too much these events. I follow it from the media, and the information you got from the media is very superficial, cannot judge. But the first attempt, as you said, was not very successful. It's difficult to convene, to bring together the whole thing together, the 57 countries. It's, we have to work to improve OIC, not to create an alternative. And this should be, the role should be played by the countries who want to reform the institution, the country who wants more support from the institution. They can work together to reform it. The bases are there. The new charter is very open. The 10-year program of action is very clear. We can make, and the examples we have mentioned and you were all aware of are there. We can build on that. You cannot, we should not destroy institutions, because creating new ones will not work. Maybe regional groups can work, but not alternative groups.
A question from Turan. He's been waiting for a while, if that's okay.
Just Mizan, before we bring Turan in, are you aware that we've gone over time?
If that's okay, we've got about 10 more minutes.
I don't want to, I want to ask the professor if that's okay, because we promised him 1 hour, 15 minutes, and we're in 1 hour, 18 minutes at the moment. So I don't want to.
Another question or so.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Yahya. Turan, I'm just unmute you now.
Selamun Aleyküm hocam.
Aleyküm selam.
This is Turan Kayoğlu. So nice to see you.
Turan, merhaba. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah hocam. Hocam, one of your legacies at the organization is the institutionalization of human rights within Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And
yes.
You were the force behind establishment of the Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission. I want to ask two questions. One is, did that permanent commission deliver your dream about the commission when you were forcing its establishment? And more broadly, what is your vision about the role of human rights as we reimagine the future of Ummah?
Thank you, Turan.
Well, I think for human rights, it's a must for all of us. And we have to work hard to ensure the rule of law and the observance of human rights in our countries and in the OIC and at large. The Human Rights Permanent Commission has been established as an independent body. And I'm glad to say that the gentleman in charge today is one very good Pakistani diplomat who has been well versed in UN Human Rights Council in Geneva for many years. And he was helpful to me in many aspects. And he's doing successfully. One of the successes which I feel proud that there was an old declaration known as the Cairo Declaration, which was written at a point where certain wrong perceptions were adopted by member states. And we tried, and I announced that we are going to change this. I have been informed that this has been changed, and I did agree. I did read the accepted text and find it excellent. Now, I always have been afraid that in an institution where member states have a dictation on the institutions, I was afraid that the human rights institution of OIC should not turn to be government's rights institution instead of human rights institution. But at least until today, as much as I can follow, maybe Dr. Turkayaoğlu can tell us better because he's writing books on these issues, can tell us what is the last situation is.
Is it Dr. Turan, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to look for him. If you could raise...
He just asked the question just now.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, I've just unmuted him. Dr. Turan, would you like to respond? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's for another conversation. Yes, I do write on issues related to organization of Islamic cooperation and human rights. I also wrote about the new declaration, and I definitely agree with you that it's definitely an improvement on the Cairo Declaration, getting closer to the, I believe, the ideals of the Universal Declaration. But this is your talk, and I'm kind of happy to kind of hear your kind of continue to follow this debate and your endorsement for the new declaration.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got one more from Matin Zaki. Yes.
And I think this should be the last question. Yeah, this should be the last question out of deference to
Matin,
the
could
professor.
you also show your video, possibly?
Thank you for the time you've given me. I just wanted to pick up on a few things. I think the professor is doing what he can, and I'm certainly interested in the books that he has written and shall read them. I refer to some of the stuff that has been discussed today. For instance, Professor mentioned the lack of cooperation when they were trying to do something about the Rohingya Muslims, and regional interests versus global interests. I just think that if you look at the name OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Countries, Islamic Interests, how many of the countries really are Islamic? I think that is the key to all our problems. And I just want to refer to Mr. Dar, who says that they give funds, philanthropic funds to organizations. The two most prominent universities that I think are really doing sterling job in education are Zaytuna College in the United States and Cambridge Muslim College in the United Kingdom. Although primarily they are religious organizations, but they do teach an all-round education, and they go for all sorts of liberal arts, so that when you come out, you are not just somebody who is propagating religion.
Sorry, do you have a question for the professor? Because we're sort of at the end of a long discussion.
The question really is that how do we come, how can we produce a university that is going to make us good enough to be able to solve our problems? And I think the key, as I said, was when do we actually become Islamic so that we can solve our problems? If there's a way in, yes. We haven't got the universities, how can we form them? This is why I mentioned the two who are doing good work. Thank you.
Professor?
Yeah. Hello?
I think we might have
lost him.
We might have lost the professor there, I think, at the end.
Let me just try one more time. Pause the video. I think he should be coming on now. Yeah, I think we've lost the professor. Yeah.
Well, I'm very sorry that we've not been able to give our salams to the professor, but I'm sure all of you would join me in expressing our appreciation that he, at the age of 77, he's given us nearly an hour and a half of his time. I think that was extremely gentlemanly of him, and fielding all of our questions. I would also like to thank Misan for facilitating today's meeting and for inviting me from the Ayan Institute to chair.
Do you want to say a
today's
few
event.
words before you close about the Ayan Institute?
It's okay. We've introduced them enough, but let's say that we're here to facilitate research and on Islamic cooperation and solidarity in the 21st century. That's our remit, and we will be conducting research in that regard from an independent, I guess, perspective from London. And we are looking to cooperate with anybody interested in furthering that work.
Sure. The professor just passed his apologies. His battery died, phone battery. So, so it's okay. That's not a problem. We'd like to thank Yahya, also the professor. Those who are registered will send you the link for the recording. If you're not registered, leave your email address on the chat and we'll send you the link for the recording. If you want to know more about the Ayan Institute, it is an up-and-coming think tank. Both Yahya is involved and Jahangir Mohammed is involved as well. So we'd like to thank everyone, and inshallah we hope to see you in our next Islamic Courses session. Take care and have a nice night. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.